out who did this. You know, we've got to get them back for what they've done. And earlier today, when I talked to you at 1:30 in the morning, they said, you know, the Palestinian militia group was responsible, and now we're hearing Osama bin Laden. So, you know, but once again, looking back to Oklahoma, you know, we could look within, and it wasn't someone from without, and after all, was it?
No. Wendy, is there a great deal of anger, or is there just an overwhelming sense of grief in New York now?
I think there's a bit of both, John. I think certainly grief and devastation, but also a great sense of anger. No one can believe it. This is on American soil. This is a direct hit on, you know, not only America but the Western nations, and no one can quite believe it.
Wendy, can we talk about this, the search for survivors? Are people being pulled from the rubble, do you know, or are no survivors being found?
Well, I heard people saying earlier today there were dozens and dozens of ambulances, and then tonight the number has dropped off. So I take that as a bad sign, that it means that there are fewer people being pulled out alive, and that is certainly a tragedy, and I'm sure that in due time we'll find out the death toll, and it is going to be high.
It's being speculated that it will be in the thousands. Is that what you're hearing there, Wendy?
That's right. Well, we know that Pearl Harbor, 2,500 people were killed in Pearl Harbor, and they're saying this is definitely going to be higher, you know, the worst terrorist attack in history.
Wendy Petrie from New York. Thank you very much indeed for joining us, Wendy.
Here in New Zealand, international flights have been cancelled or rescheduled as airports across America were closed. Auckland airport staff have had to counsel distressed travellers, and airport security and police are on high alert. Reporter Sarah Bradley joins us now from Auckland International Airport. Good evening, Sarah.
Good evening, Carol. Well, air travellers were in shock today, some breaking down in tears as they arrived on flights here at Auckland International Airport and found out about the devastation back in the United States.
It was news almost too terrible to believe. Mass destruction and death on a mind-numbing scale.
I just feel so sorry for it. It's horrific.
What tragedy. Terrible. Terrible, terrible, terrible.
I just give thanks to God that we're here safely, and I want to pray for all those other families that are involved in that situation, because unfortunately they're not as lucky as we are.
It is the worst that I've ever heard of, and such a cowardly act, and to kill innocent people.
With America closing off its airspace and Britain imposing tight restrictions, some captains were ordered to turn their planes back to New Zealand.
I don't think it sunk in exactly what had happened. He just said there was a terrorist attack.
Yeah, just thought it must be something pretty big, you know, to close all the airspace, considering we were going to LA.
There was news too that one of the hijacked and deliberately crashed United Airlines planes had a code-share agreement to carry Air New Zealand passengers.
At this point, our information tells us no Air New Zealand ticketed passengers on that code-shared flight.
Today, American travellers were divided on what their president should do, but at least one woman's convinced Muslim fundamentalist Osama bin Laden is to blame.
Quit being a gentleman and go after that character.
It's not a matter of retaliating, it's a matter of bringing people to justice.
Security at the international airport has also been significantly boosted, with both police and the airport's own security personnel making their presence felt.
Sarah, you've been at the airport on and off for most of the day. What's the mood like there right now?
Well, I just came out from being in the airport just before. I would describe the mood as quiet and very somber. There are very few people in there. Flights are arriving, and of course now people know what's happened in the United States, so they're very somber as they get off planes. This morning, of course, people didn't know, planes that were coming from the United States, people on those planes were not told about what had happened. I guess they thought it would be better for them to land, and then police got on the planes and told them about the devastation. So this morning, shock and tears. Right now, quiet and somber.
How extensively will today's events affect New Zealand travellers, Sarah?
Well, they're going to affect travellers quite extensively. Of course, people cannot leave New Zealand and travel to America, business travellers, and of course people going for holidays. But also remember, it's going to affect people who are already in America. There's no travelling within America, there's no travelling out of America. And of course, what about tourists here, American tourists, who can't get back home? So there's really going to be quite a lot of disruption. The United States is telling us that they expect maybe their airspace will be opened tomorrow morning our time. But I just spoke to airport staff here, and they said they have not heard anything officially, and as far as they're concerned, all flights are cancelled indefinitely.
We understand there were a couple of Air New Zealand flights diverted.
Yeah, there were 2 flights diverted today. The first flight was NZ2, that was going from Auckland to Los Angeles, and that was diverted back again to Auckland, so they never got there. Those people were told on the flight what had happened, so they were aware of the devastation, although not the effect of it. And they said when they got off and they saw the television screens in the duty-free lounge, they were all absolutely shocked. The other flight that was diverted was NZ54, which was from Rarotonga to Los Angeles. That was actually diverted to Tahiti, and Air New Zealand tells us that they are now working on getting those passengers back to their homes, whether they be Auckland or perhaps Rarotonga.
On a personal note, Sarah, you used to live in New York and work near the World Trade Center. Do you remember discussion about the possibility of something like this happening?
Yeah, this is very difficult for me personally. I actually only just got back from living for 10 years in New York 6 months ago, and I used to walk through that World Trade Center concourse every morning around 9 o'clock. And since the 93 bombing, of course, of the World Trade Center, the Oklahoma bombing, and of course the terrorist attacks on American embassies in Africa, everyone's been very nervous. All people who work down there in those financial companies have been very nervous over the last couple of years. We always thought we were a target. I mean, you know, the financial capital of the world, a place where over 50,000 people work, and so there was always a sense that terrorists would target the World Trade Center in New York City.
And tell me, have you been able to get through to friends today?
Luckily, I have gotten through to most of my close friends over in New York, and everyone is safe, but there are still some people I haven't heard from that I worked with. Of course, I work with a lot of colleagues at companies in the World Trade Center, lawyers, financial firms, so I am very concerned, and it's very hard to get through to America at the moment with phone lines.
Reporter Sarah Bradley from Auckland International Airport, thanks for joining us.
Well, we're joined now by Acting Prime Minister Jim Anderton, who's at Parliament in Wellington. Thanks for joining us, Mr. Anderton.
Fine, John.
What an awful day for humanity, eh?
Well, it is. As I said, I think this morning, this wasn't just a blow against America, it was a blow against humanity. And as the news has come in, and the casualty toll inevitably looks completely disastrous, one can't just wonder what on earth we've reduced ourselves to as humankind when the anger and hatred is so great that this mindless, insane terrorism, which destroys innocent people in huge numbers, is somehow put up as a weapon for a cause, whatever that cause might be. I can't imagine that the cause has done itself any good today.
Mr. Anderton, do we know about the fate of any New Zealanders working in the World Trade Center?
No, we don't. We can in some ways say that no news is good news, but the truth is there's very little news about any casualties. We have been checking all day as to whether there are any New Zealand companies in the World Trade Center. I haven't got any information that confirms that there is any, except that anecdotally we know there are a lot of New Zealanders working for international and United States companies in the World Trade Center, just as your reporter was talking about, and it's almost beyond belief that we would have escaped unscathed. I would imagine there are not many nationalities or countries in the world that have escaped some kind of problem as a result of this catastrophe.
What about the search for a perpetrator? This is a natural thing to do, I guess. Are people jumping the gun? Do we have any idea really who it was?
Well, we don't. The agencies that we have, our security agencies, are of course in touch with their brother and sister agencies throughout the world and in America. I would imagine that the United States Security Services will be going through the passenger list of those aircraft with a fine-tooth comb, and you wouldn't have to be a rocket scientist to work out that they will find out who the odd people out in those passenger lists are. It's inconceivable, for example, that there weren't pilots on that plane as terrorists or a pilot, because the way those planes were flown, they were flown with great deliberation and, dare I say it, without any admiration, skill. And the planes were powered into those buildings. They weren't just striking them glancing blows. They were meant to be death blows, and of course they were.
Jim Anderton, very quickly, is there anything in real terms that New Zealand can do to help people in New York?
I doubt it. And New York is, you know, 3-4 times bigger than the whole of New Zealand, and the United States is many, many times bigger than New Zealand, so they have the resources to cope. I think the United States will be comforted to know that for all of the disagreements there are around the world from time